Hi, everybody. It's Mike here from the Parallel Systems broadcast. Welcome to the live stream. On tonight's show, we're going to be talking a little bit about this crazy totalitarian proclamation in Canada, where they're essentially saying that people are now barred from going into the forests or the woodland. They are literally banned from entering nature. It's a climate lockdown, is what it is. And this is something that people said was a huge conspiracy theory that there will be no climate lockdowns. Are you insane? Well, after 2020, people started to consider what else might be locked down. Remember when there was blocking children from going into playgrounds and public benches had police tape across it? This was insane, but they've taken it a step further now in Canada. They've done something that, so far as I can tell, is without precedent. So we're going to be getting into that tonight. But first, let's just have a look at what they're actually saying. This is their own website. This is Nova Scotia. So this is the province where it's happening. But make no mistake, if they can get away with it here, they're going to be sending this everywhere. And it's not just going to be in Canada. The goal will be to have this everywhere, in my opinion. It says the province is restricting travel and activities in the woods because continued hot, dry conditions have greatly increased the risk of wildfires. Now, they're not saying that people cannot go into the woods because there are actual fires. So this isn't a case of, oh, the woods are on fire, there's smoke. It's no, you can't go into the woods because there is a risk of fire because it's summer and it's hot. Two very, very different things. Very, very different things. And it says the restrictions effective as of 4 p.m. today, which was August the 5th, include hiking, camping, fishing, and the use of vehicles in woods. They are no longer permitted. Trail systems through woods are off limits, and camping is allowed only in campgrounds. These and other measures are in place on provincial, crown, and private land until October the 15th, or until conditions allow them to be lifted. The fine for violating the restrictions is $25,000. Now, I know the Canadian dollar is a dog shit currency, but 25,000 Canadian dollars is still a pretty hefty fine. Consider this for a moment. In the UK, you can be involved in a violent assault and you'll probably get a fine that's cheaper than that. People in Canada today are now being fined or threatened with fines of, what would it be in US dollars? I don't know, 17,000 US dollars or something for going on to Crown land, which is essentially all of Canada. The Crown, which is the British Crown, they own 89% of Canadian land, and then 11% only is held in private hands. So this is why they can do this, because they own all of the land. It's not like in the US where you can own your own land, or in most countries where you own some land. It's like, no, they own everything out there. Now, like I said, they're saying it's because conditions are extremely dry. And it's the Premier, Tim Houston. I've actually got an image of, can we call him a man? There's a picture of him with his smacking smug grin. I was reading his Wikipedia page and it says that his name came to light, that Tim Houston's name had been mentioned several times in the Paradise Papers. That's the offshore havens in the Cayman Islands and Bermuda islands where people were hiding their wealth because they didn't want to pay taxes. Well, this guy's now a politician, so you pay your taxes and you pay for guys like this. I mean, I guess some responsibility has to go to the public who voted him in, right? I mean, they voted in this lowlife dictator, tin pot dictator, who's now telling people that you cannot go out into the woods. Now, it gets worse. It gets worse. They're actually asking people to report violations. So they want to turn Canada, or at least Nova Scotia, but let's face it, if you look at what happened during the 2020 to 2023 period in Canada, it was across the nation where they really lost the plot. They went full blown totalitarian. And this, like I said, I think it's going to spread, but they're actually asking people in Nova Scotia to report if to report anything that looks like a violation, not just of the ban. Okay, I can understand that in dry conditions there's a ban on bans, lighting fires, that makes sense. I can recognize that. I think any sane human being would say, yeah, that's a bad idea. It's like if there was a chemical spill, you might say to people, you can't go there. There's a chemical spill. If there's an actual hazard, but actually saying to people, you don't have the right to enter nature anymore because we don't trust you. And actually, it's not a right to go outside into natural habitats. It's a privilege, and we can revoke it at any time. So they're actually asking people to tittle tattle on each other. So if they see anyone making a violation of the woods restriction, you have to report it by calling 1-800. I'm not even going to give you the number. I don't want you to call it. Now, there's some great comments here, which I probably can't read out on this platform. This guy's quite interesting. He decided to go and enter the woods, and he actually told them he was going to do this. He wanted to defy the ban and get himself an ice-old fine because he found out that if he gets a fine, he can challenge them in court, and he wants to take them, the province, to court and Tim Houston to basically show that this is illegitimate and you can't stop people going into the woodlands now. How far he's going to get with that, I don't know. But he did succeed. He got himself a fine. However, they actually gave him a fine of 28,000 Canadian dollars. So I don't know if inflation had happened between the time he was thinking about setting foot in the woods and the time he got into the woods. I know the currency is terrible. Maybe there was some disparity there. Inflation had gone up, but actually, what he said was that there was the police said there was a victim surcharge. So I don't know who he victimized. I don't know if he made someone cry by entering the woods. Maybe some green protesters and climate change activists. I don't know. But that poor guy actually got himself a $28,000 fine. Now, I hope he takes it to court and I hope he does well. Yeah, he says he retired Canadian veteran, served in Afghanistan, NORAD, and Iraq as well. So let's wish him the best of luck in that. But I just wanted to talk about this in general, really. I looked online and for the life of me, I cannot find any precedent for something like this in the history of Canada. There are protections already in place for things like illegal cutting of timber. For example, if you illegally cut down some trees, then of course you can get a fine, $50,000 for individuals, 100,000 for repeat offences. But that's a crime. You're essentially stealing trees. Dumping on crown land, so illegal dumping, taking tires and trash out to the forest and leaving it there. But listen to this: the fine for dumping begins at $352. So now the fine for actually literally stepping from the border of a forest into the forest is 25,000, but you could stand on the border and throw a dirty old burning tire into the forest and you'd get a fine for $352. Make it make sense. You can't, because it doesn't. There's a Protection of Property Act which stops people from trespassing onto certain types of private property. So like lawns, enclosed land, areas that have a no entry sign on it. The offences start there at around 237. So you can illegally break onto somebody's property and you're going to get a fine of $237. But if you go onto the lands that are supposedly public, but we know they're not, then it's $25,000. You aren't allowed to illegally fish. In certain provinces like Saskatchewan, I really like the name of that one, Saskatchewan. You've got to be very careful. It says they are in tightening trespassing laws, but these are all criminal acts, is my point. There is no precedent for stopping people from going into woodland when there is no disaster, there's no natural disaster, no health scare, nothing. It's just, we don't trust you to be in the woodland. All of that woodland, the entirety of the province. Now, what it makes me think of actually is serfdom, because not many people even recognize just how lucky we are to be living in a time where we've had our liberties given to us. And if you don't fight back for on these things, if you don't push the line backwards every time they push it forwards, you're going to find yourself back in serfdom. This is what it used to look like from the time of William the Conqueror when he came to Great Britain. And bearing in mind, Great Britain is all crown land, and the reason Canada's crown land is because of the same reason. It's owned by the same family. So from the time of 1066, all land in Great Britain was taken. It was the first great taking of British history. And they created a book called the Doomsday Book. And in this book, they went around the entirety of the country. They surveyed everything, every parcel of land, every building, every sheep, every goat, everything, and they put it all into a giant book. And then they wrote a legal document that transferred the ownership of all of the contents of the book, so the entire country, over to the King of England. Now, of course, for him to get to that point, he had to kill a lot of people. There was something called the Harrying of the North, where they slashed and burnt the entirety of the north of England, killing anyone who stood in their way, and then they did scorched earth to starve people to death. This is how they got the land. This is the history. And then after that, they created a lot of laws basically saying that nobody can go onto private land anywhere. And it was all private land. So they had the royal forest laws. If you was caught in a forest, they could just kill you on the spot. They could fine you, imprison you, or mutilate you. For example, in the 12th and 13th centuries, if you were found killing a royal deer, they would take your eye out. Now, you might think, well, stealing a deer, but this is when people were starving. They were serfs. Before the time of William the Conqueror, people owned the land. They actually had homesteads and farms, and they had allodial title, which means they were the owners. After this point, all of the land was owned by the crown, and then they parceled off certain bits to the super rich elites that had helped him sack the country, and then they enslaved the people on the land that they used to own and got them to work, 10 months, 11 months of the year, essentially. Well, it was 12 months of the year for free, and they just allowed them to cultivate a small plot of land for themselves to grow some food to survive. But of course, if you got kicked off your land, or if you, for whatever reason, run away, then you had no food. And the only way to get food was to go into the forest and try and find it. So if you got caught killing a deer, yes, they would take an eye out. Unauthorized timber cutting. Imagine that, the freezing cold winter, you're going to freeze to death. So you go and pick up some wood off the floor, even of the forest, just some twigs. You would again be, you'd either be fined, and if you couldn't pay the fine, you'd get put in prison. So everything was a privilege. Everything was a right. Everything was something that had to be granted unto you. There was zero liberty at all. And this is what people fought for thousands of years, to get the liberty so that they didn't have to live like this. Now, it looks to me like what's happening in the West is they're trying to roll this back at record pace. And people who accept this are essentially accepting their own slavery, because that's where it goes to. You will have to have permission for everything. For leaving your house eventually, if they can stop you going into nature, it's only one step backwards from leaving the house. We've already seen this. We saw this in 2020, 2021. If you left your house, they was asking you, what are you doing outside? Is it essential? So for me, this is absolutely shocking. And I just wanted to show you this image here that I put on the screen. This was back in Great Britain in 1931, because people don't realize that all land used to be private. There was no national parks. If you lived in some crappy shithole coal mining town where you spent your entire life working down a coal mine, getting black lung, and having your children have to go work in the mine at aged 4 and 5, doing 60, 70 hours a week, to live in some tiny hovel where you had one room, the entire family in it. People were living like that, and there was nowhere else for them to go. You couldn't go out to the countryside for a walk. It was all private land. If you was caught on somebody's land, there was gamekeepers with dogs and guns. That's what it was like. But people towards the early part of the 1900s had had enough. And especially after World War One, and all of these men had been sent off to die for a nation that treated them and their families like dogs, they said, no, we're going to start to go outside, and we're going to go walk in those beautiful hills we can see, but we're not allowed to actually enter. So they began trespassing, and they do it as a massive group, and they got into some real fights, some real scuffles. The gamekeepers would beat them with sticks, and they'd hold guns at them. But the more and more people did it, the safer it got, because they were a big force. And you can see here, this was something called the mass trespass. And if you want to know why you have the right to go into nature at all, you need to know this story. The mass trespass happened on Kinder Scout, which is in a place called the Peak District in Great Britain. It's one of our national parks. It was the very first national park. But the only reason it became a national park is because of people like this defying diktats that stopped them from going on what was supposedly private land. And they said, we ain't hurting the land. We just want to walk across it. We just want to climb the hills, see the nature. It's our right. We work all week. We slave away in these horrible, miserable jobs. So on the weekend, we want to be able to go out on this land. And this was a mass trespass. And they arrested some of them. I think they put 3 or 4 of them in jail even, but it was this kind of activity that got people their liberties. It was people not being cowards. It was people not being cowtailed into becoming sniveling cowards who just go along with whatever they're told. It was people being rebellious and saying, actually, no, we're going to define what our lives are. And they went and they did the trespass. And it took another 20 years. It wasn't until the 1950s when the first national parks were created. But were it not for these men doing things like this, and it was women too, by the way, the mass trespass, we would not have the freedoms we've got now, which we call the right to roam. And across England, if you go to England, it's even better than the US. In the US, you've got your national parks, but you've also got lots of private land where you can't enter. In the UK, you've got private land where you can even go across. It's called the right to roam, and there's public bridleways and pathways all across the private land too. Now, you have to stick to the bridleways when you're on it. But again, that was unprecedented. Now, a few years ago, they actually said there will be no more additions to that. So any previous right to roam route that was not resubmitted, let's imagine that people haven't been walking it. If they didn't resubmit it to the database, it would be erased. So I think they're trying to slowly claw back these rights and these freedoms. Now, what's happening in Canada right now is essentially the announcement that you don't have a right to go out into public land. Therefore, what are you? What does that make you? I'd say it makes you pretty much close to a serf, and serfdom's one step away from slavery. And also, they're enacting this kind of Stasi tell on your neighbor attitude, which they did during 2020 as well. And that is something that is used to turn people into the lowest form of human, where you would actually tell on someone for going outside or for not deciding not to cover their face because they want to breathe fresh air. So I think this is the start of something nasty. You know, what we saw with the truckers' protest, where they actually punished people just for donating to something, that's where it's going to go. It's going to be a system of threats and punishments. Do as we say, not as we do, because they'll be doing what they want, as we saw. We've seen the videos. And then it's going to get to the point very soon where you'll have digital currencies, and therefore they will be able to just turn you off. You won't be able to transact. You won't be able to travel. This already happens in China. If people in China have the digital credit, the social credit system number go down too low, then they can't travel. They can't leave the country. They can't get plane tickets. And I think this is going to come out as very fast. In America right now, we're seeing them tap Palantir to build out these mega databases so they can literally see everything that you're doing at all points. Now, once they add the digital currency to that, you are so close, so close to having a system where they can control you entirely. So what do you do about this? Well, you get outside in nature for a start. You know, do not let them take an inch, because once they take an inch, it will become a mile. So there you go. That's what's happening over there in crazy Canada. And, you know, most people that I speak to in Canada are desperate to leave. And when I have consultations with people, I had one recently with a couple in Canada, they're asking me about where can I go? How can I relocate? What's the best place to relocate to? And where can I have the most freedoms? And that's what it's about. You've got to think, if you cannot have the freedoms you require, the liberty you are given by God in a country, because they're going to punish you for it, you've got to ask yourself seriously, is that the place where you want to stay? Maybe it is, but maybe there's a better place for you. And if so, I think time's ticking on when you can make that move, because at some point, who knows, maybe it'll be impossible. Once again, we've already had that period of history where we couldn't travel. So those are things to think about right now. In any case, thank you so much for listening to the live stream. Let me know in the comment section what you think of these crazy restrictions? And also, if you are in Canada, let me know what you're going to do about it, if anything. I'd be very interested to hear that. In closing, take care of yourselves, everyone. Thank you for listening. Check out the Substack if you'd like to listen to my newsletter or read my most recent articles. And also, of course, you can go across to the website where you can find me for one-to-one consultations if you would like some support with your investing, wealth preservation, or in this instance, maybe relocation. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.